A cold rain was falling the night. The flashing red and blue lights filled her rearview mirror. He approached the window with his hand on his holster, a sneer on his face, and told her she had two choices: step out of the car or be dragged out. He thought he was intimidating just another helpless woman on a dark road. He had no idea the woman behind the wheel was the federal prosecutor, quietly building a sprawling corruption case to put him in prison. The dashboard clock of the charcoal sedan read 1:14 a.m. The wipers slapped rhythmically against the windshield, smearing the heavy rain that blanketed the streets of Camden. Evelyn Brooks kept her eyes on the slick asphalt, the exhaustion of an 80-hour work week settling deep into her bones. At 38, Evelyn had built a reputation as one of the most ruthless and meticulous special prosecutors in the State Attorney General's office. But tonight, stripped of her tailored courtroom armor, wearing an oversized college sweatshirt and plain wire-rimmed glasses, she looked like anyone else driving home too late on a deserted county road. That was exactly what Sergeant Bradley Mitchell saw when he clocked her going 3 miles over the speed limit. The sudden glare of the strobe lights shattered the quiet dark of the cabin. Evelyn sighed, a short, sharp exhale of irritation, and engaged her turn signal, pulling her sedan smoothly onto the gravel shoulder of Route 9. She shifted into park, turned off the engine, and placed both hands on the steering wheel, exactly at 10 and 2. It was instinct. It was survival. In the side mirror, she watched the heavy, imposing silhouette of a police officer step out of a marked Camden Police Department cruiser. He took his time. It was a deliberate, predatory stroll, a man completely comfortable in the power he wielded in the dark. He stopped just behind her driver's side door, intentionally standing in her blind spot, and rapped his heavy maglite flashlight sharply against the glass. Bang! 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 Evelyn pressed the button to roll down the window. The smell of wet asphalt and pine flooded the car. License, registration, and proof of insurance. Now, the officer demanded. His voice was a low, gravelly bark, devoid of the standard professional pleasantries. Evelyn turned her head slightly, keeping her hands visible. Officer, my license is in my purse on the passenger seat. My registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now. Sergeant Bradley Mitchell. She immediately clocked the nameplate on his chest and the badge number, 4482, leaned down, shining the blinding beam of the flashlight directly into her eyes. She squinted, resisting the urge to raise a hand to block it. I didn't ask for a speech. I told you to hand them over, Mitchell snapped. He rested his right hand heavily on the butt of his service weapon. You people always want to narrate everything. Just move slow. Evelyn's jaw tightened, but her voice remained chillingly calm. She retrieved the documents and handed them out to the window. Mitchell snatched them from her fingers. He glanced at the license, then back at her, the beam of light still burning into her vision. Evelyn Brooks, he read, butchering the pronunciation of her last name slightly with a mocking drawl. You're a long way from the city, Evelyn. What are you doing driving through my jurisdiction at this time of night? I'm heading home from work, Sergeant, Evelyn replied evenly. Work, Mitchell scoffed, shining the light into the back seat, lingering on the locked heavy-duty briefcase resting on the floorboards. What kind of work keeps you out till 1 a.m.? You cleaning office buildings down in the financial district? The microaggression hung heavy in the damp air. Evelyn didn't flinch. I work in the legal field. Right. Legal field, Mitchell smirked, stepping back slightly but keeping the flashlight trained on her. Listen to me closely. You were swerving back there, crossed the center line. Suspicion of DUI. I was maintaining my lane, Sergeant, Evelyn stated, her tone shifting from polite compliance to a subtle, ironclad firmness. "And I haven't had a drop of alcohol." Mitchell leaned back in, his face inches from the glass, his breath smelling faintly of stale coffee and peppermint. "Are you calling me a liar in my own town, girl?" The threat in his voice was no longer veiled. "Because I can pull you out of this car right now. I can tear this vehicle apart, looking for contraband. I can have you sitting in a holding cell for 48 hours before anyone even knows you're missing. People who don't cooperate out here tend to have real bad luck." Evelyn looked directly into the glare of the flashlight, fixing her gaze where she knew his eyes were. She was memorizing the cadence of his voice, the specific nature of the threat, the exact positioning of his hands. "I am cooperating, Sergeant," she said softly. "I'm giving you no reason to escalate this." Mitchell stared at her for a long, tense moment. He was used to fear. He thrived on the panicked stuttering, the trembling hands, the desperate pleas for leniency. Evelyn gave him none of that. Her absolute stillness seemed to unnerve him, interpreting her calm as defiance. "You're lucky it's raining, and I'm nearing the end of my shift," Mitchell finally growled, shoving her cards back through the window. They fluttered and landed on her lap. "Next time you drive through Camden, you keep your eyes forward and your mouth shut. Now get out of here before I change my mind." Mitchell slapped the roof of her car hard enough to leave a dent, turned, and walked back to his cruiser. Evelyn sat perfectly still as he pulled away, peeling out with a spray of gravel. Once the cruiser's taillights disappeared into the fog, she reached up and tapped the small, discreet housing behind her rearview mirror. The covert dashcam, standard issue for her current undercover task force, blipped a tiny blue light. It had recorded everything: the audio, the threat, the badge number. Evelyn picked up her license, wiped a drop of rain from it, and slipped it back into her wallet. A cold, dangerous smile touched the corners of her mouth. "See you soon, Sergeant Mitchell," she whispered to the empty car. By 8 a.m. the following morning, the Camden traffic stop was a distant memory, compared to the avalanche of paperwork covering the conference table in a secure, unmarked room on the 14th floor of the state capitol building. This was the nerve center of Operation Cracked Shield. Evelyn Brooks stood at the head of the table, a stark contrast to the woman from the night before. Today, she wore a sharp, charcoal-grey pantsuit, her hair pulled back into a severe, no-nonsense knot. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, scanned the massive corkboard taking up the entire western wall. The board was a complex web of photographs, police incident reports, bank statements, and red string. Right in the dead center, pinned under a glaring spotlight, was an 8x10 glossy photograph of Sergeant Bradley Mitchell. Samuel Reed, Evelyn's lead investigator and a former FBI field agent, walked into the room carrying 2 steaming cups of black coffee. He set one down in front of Evelyn and rubbed his temples. "The wiretap on the burner phone Mitchell uses paid off," Samuel said, his voice a low rumble. He handed Evelyn a transcript. "He called Officer Davis at 0300 hours. They're coordinating a shakedown of the new auto body shop on 5th Street. Mitchell told Davis to find some code violations so they could seize the owner's operational funds under civil asset forfeiture." Evelyn took a sip of the bitter coffee, reading the transcript rapidly. "He's getting sloppy. He used to mask the extortion as routine code enforcement. Now he's just demanding cash seizures. Arrogance breeds sloppiness," Samuel noted, leaning against the edge of the heavy oak table. "He's been running this precinct like his own personal fiefdom for 6 years. Chief Wallace Dunn either doesn't know or he's getting a cut. My money is on the latter." Evelyn walked over to the board, trailing a finger along a red string that connected Mitchell's photo to a crime scene picture of a young black man sitting on a curb, hands cuffed behind his back, a bruised eye swelling shut. The young man was Terence Gibbs. 9 months ago, Terence had been a promising engineering student at the State University. He had been pulled over by Mitchell on a phantom tail light violation. When Terence knew his rights and questioned the search of his vehicle, Mitchell dragged him out, beat him, and miraculously found 3 ounces of cocaine stuffed under the passenger seat, cocaine that matched the chemical profile of drugs seized from an evidence locker Mitchell had access to weeks prior. Terence lost his scholarship. He spent 4 months in county jail before his public defender managed to get the charges dropped due to a technicality regarding the chain of custody. But the damage was done. Terence's life had been derailed. It was the Gibbs case that had caught Evelyn's attention. As she pulled the threads, she uncovered a horrifying pattern. Dozens of young men, mostly minorities, subjected to the same brutal playbook by Mitchell and his squad. False arrests, planted evidence, excessive force, and a systemic culture of intimidation. The State Attorney General had brought Evelyn in quietly. Her mandate was clear: build a federal civil rights and racketeering case so airtight, so overwhelmingly documented, that the local police union wouldn't be able to protect Mitchell and his cronies. "Samuel," Evelyn said, her eyes fixed on Mitchell's photograph. "Pull the dash cam and body cam logs for Mitchell's cruiser, Unit 44, for the hours of midnight to 2 a.m. last night." Samuel raised an eyebrow. "Last night? Did something happen?" Evelyn turned to face him, the ghost of a smile playing on her lips again. "Sergeant Mitchell pulled me over." Samuel froze, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth. "Are you serious? Did he make you?" "No," Evelyn said. "He saw a black woman driving alone in a decent car on a dark road. He saw prey. He threatened to drag me out of the car, implied he could make me disappear in a holding cell, and attempted to intimidate me into a search." Samuel set his cup down, a mixture of anger and professional glee washing over his face. "Tell me you had the covert rig running." "Audio and high-definition video," Evelyn confirmed. "But I want his body cam footage too. He tapped the roof of my car before he left. I want to see if he manually killed his mic before he approached the window. If he did, it shows premeditation to violate department policy to issue an off-the-record threat." "I'll subpoena the logs through a shell entity," Samuel said, already pulling out his encrypted laptop. "A routine civilian complaint discovery request. The local PD won't flag it. They get dozens of them a week." "Exactly," Evelyn said, walking back to the table and opening a fresh manila folder. "Mitchell is the linchpin. If we break him, Davis, Miller, and the rest of his squad will fold like cheap suits to avoid federal time. But to break him, we need to strip away his sense of invincibility. He needs to realize that the system he manipulates can be used against him." "So, what's the play?" Samuel asked, his fingers flying across the keyboard. "We escalate," Evelyn replied, pulling a blank subpoena template from the stack. "I'm not going to arrest him on the federal RICO charges yet. I want him in a room. I want him on the record, under oath, defending a minor civilian complaint regarding a traffic stop. I want him to lie to a state official about his conduct." Samuel grinned. "You're going to get him to commit perjury." Title 18 U.S.C. Section 1621. Evelyn nodded, filling in Mitchell's name on the document. "He'll think it's just a slap on the wrist. He'll walk in arrogant. He'll lie about the threat, lie about the reason for the stop, and lie about turning off his body cam. And once he signs that sworn deposition..." "We drop the hammer," Samuel finished. "We don't just drop the hammer, Samuel," Evelyn corrected softly, her eyes hardening into obsidian. "We drop the entire courthouse on him." 2 weeks later, the Camden Police Department headquarters was buzzing with the low-level hum of bureaucracy. Sergeant Bradley Mitchell sat in the stark, fluorescent-lit waiting room of the Internal Affairs Division, aggressively chewing a piece of spearmint gum. He was in his Class A uniform, the brass buttons polished, but his posture was a picture of bored irritation. Beside him sat Gregory Lawson, a heavy-set man with a flushed face and a comb-over. Lawson was the district union representative, a man whose entire career consisted of making disciplinary infractions disappear into the ether of administrative appeals. "I can't believe Dunn is making me waste a Tuesday morning on this garbage," Mitchell complained, checking his heavy, tactical watch. It was a routine stop. No ticket issued, no arrest made. The Broad just had a chip on her shoulder. "Relax, Brad," Lawson said dismissively, scrolling through his phone. "It's standard procedure. Citizen filed an anonymous harassment grievance through the state oversight portal. Dunn has to put on a show for the city council. We go in. The IA investigator asks you a few softball questions. You say you acted within department guidelines, and we're out of here by 11 for early lunch at O'Malley's." "It's the disrespect that pisses me off," Mitchell growled, leaning forward and resting his elbows on his knees. "People don't know their place anymore. Used to be, the badge meant something. Now every civilian with an internet connection thinks they're a legal expert." "Let them think it," Lawson chuckled. "End of the day, the union protects its own. The investigator handling this is some desk jockey from the Capitol, probably just looking to justify their budget. We give 'em nothing." A young, nervous-looking administrative assistant opened the heavy wooden door to Conference Room B. "Sergeant Mitchell, Mr. Lawson, the investigator is ready for you." Mitchell let out an exaggerated sigh, stood up, and adjusted his utility belt. He swaggered into the conference room, with Lawson trailing behind him. The room was Spartan. A long, rectangular faux wood table, a few cheap rolling chairs, and a single window looking out into a brick alleyway. At the far end of the table sat a stenographer, her fingers hovering silently over her machine. But the chair at the head of the table, the investigator's chair, was empty. Instead, a single man stood by the window. It was Samuel Reed, dressed in a sharp navy suit, casually flipping through a thick binder. Mitchell frowned. He didn't recognize the man, which immediately put him on edge. Mitchell knew everyone in the county IA division. "You the guy running this circus?" Mitchell asked, pulling out a chair and sitting down heavily, not waiting to be invited. "Let's get this over with. I've got real police work to do." Samuel didn't look up from the binder. "I'm not the lead investigator, Sergeant. I'm just here to observe." "Observe what?" Lawson asked, his professional bluster activating as he took the seat next to Mitchell. "My client is here voluntarily to answer preliminary questions regarding an unfounded civilian complaint. We haven't been provided with discovery, the name of the complainant, or the specific nature of the violation." "All of that will be provided on the record, Mr. Lawson," Samuel said calmly, finally closing the binder. He checked his watch. "She should be here, right?" The door behind Mitchell opened. The click of expensive heels echoed sharply against the linoleum floor. Mitchell turned in his chair, a scowl ready on his face to intimidate whoever was walking in. But the scowl froze. Evelyn Brooks walked into the room. She wasn't wearing a baggy sweatshirt or wire-rimmed glasses. She was dressed in a pristine, tailored crimson power suit that radiated authority. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she carried a sleek leather portfolio. She didn't look at Mitchell immediately. Instead, she walked straight to the head of the table, set her portfolio down, and unclasped it with a sharp, definitive snap. Mitchell stared. The gears in his head ground together, struggling to reconcile the helpless, quiet woman he had bullied on Route 9 with the commanding, icy presence standing at the head of the table. A cold knot began to form in the pit of his stomach. Lawson, oblivious to Mitchell's sudden paralysis, leaned forward. "And who are you supposed to be?" Evelyn finally raised her eyes. She looked directly at Mitchell. The eye contact was absolute, predatory, and familiar. Mitchell felt a bead of sweat prick the back of his neck. "My name is Evelyn Brooks," she said, her voice echoing in the quiet room. It was the same voice from the car, but stripped of compliance. It was the voice of a judge handing down a sentence. She reached into her portfolio and pulled out a stack of documents, sliding them precisely down the center of the table until they stopped directly in front of Lawson. "I am the special prosecutor for the State Attorney General's Office of Civil Rights and Public Trust," Evelyn continued, taking her seat. "I am also the complainant in the matter of the traffic stop that occurred on Route 9 at 1:14 a.m. on the 12th of this month." Lawson scoffed, looking at the papers. "Wait a minute. The complainant is the investigator? That's a massive conflict of interest. This whole meeting is a sham." "Brad, don't say a word. We're leaving." Lawson went to stand up, but Mitchell didn't move. He was staring at Evelyn, the memory of her face illuminated by his flashlight burning in his mind. "I work in the legal field. You can leave if you want, Mr. Lawson," Evelyn said smoothly, folding her hands on the table. "But if Sergeant Mitchell leaves this room before this deposition is concluded, I will have the U.S. Marshals waiting outside execute the federal arrest warrants currently sitting in my briefcase." Lawson froze halfway out of his chair. "Federal warrants? What the hell are you talking about? This is a traffic stop complaint." "The traffic stop was merely the preamble, Mr. Lawson," Evelyn said, her gaze never leaving Mitchell's pale face. "Sergeant Mitchell and I are here to discuss a broader set of issues. Issues like Title 18 violations, deprivation of rights under color of law, extortion, and the framing of Terence Gibbs." Mitchell swallowed hard. His mouth was suddenly completely dry. The arrogant swagger was gone, replaced by the terrifying realization of a rat that had just noticed the steel jaws of the trap closing around it. "Now," Evelyn said, gesturing to the stenographer who began typing furiously. "Let's go on the record. Sergeant Mitchell, state your full name and badge number for the transcript. And remember, you are under oath." The silence in conference room B was absolute, broken only by the frantic, muted clicking of the stenographer's machine. The rhythmic tapping sounded like a countdown clock, ticking away the last remaining seconds of Bradley Mitchell's career and his freedom. Mitchell sat rigidly in his chair, the starch of his Class A uniform suddenly feeling like a straitjacket. His eyes darted from Evelyn's impeccably manicured hands resting on the table to Samuel Reed, who was leaning against the brick-facing window, watching him with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a rat in a maze. "I asked you a question, Sergeant," Evelyn prompted, her voice slicing through the heavy air. "For the record, name and badge number." Mitchell cleared his throat. It sounded like sandpaper. "Bradley Mitchell, badge 4482. "Thank you," Evelyn said, opening the first folder. "Let's begin with the events of the 12th. In your official incident report, which you signed and submitted to your watch commander, you stated you pulled my vehicle over because I was swerving and repeatedly crossing the center double yellow line. Is that correct?" Gregory Lawson, the union rep, suddenly slammed his hand flat on the table. The color had drained from his flushed face, replaced by a pasty, sickly pallor. "Hold on. Stop the record. As union counsel, I am advising my client not to answer any further questions. You ambushed us. This is a bad faith interview. You cannot act as both the victim of an alleged civil infraction and the federal prosecutor investigating it." Evelyn didn't even blink. "I am not acting as the prosecutor on the traffic violation, Mr. Lawson. That matter was referred to the Independent Oversight Board. I am here strictly in my capacity as a federal prosecutor investigating a systemic pattern of civil rights abuses under Title 18 U.S.C. Section 242, deprivation of rights under color of law. The traffic stop is merely an establishing predicate of behavior. Now, I will ask again. Did my vehicle cross the center line, Sergeant? Mitchell looked at Lawson, his eyes wide with panic. Lawson shook his head violently. Don't say a word, Brad. Not one word. We are invoking his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination, and we are leaving. If you invoke the Fifth, Evelyn stated coldly, you are acknowledging that a truthful answer would implicate you in a crime. Furthermore, under Garrity, refusal to answer questions in an internal affairs investigation can result in immediate termination. But frankly, termination is the least of your worries. Evelyn reached into her portfolio and slid a bound, glossy packet across the table. My vehicle is a state-issued interceptor, heavily modified for undercover field work, Evelyn explained, her tone conversational but lethal. It is equipped with an advanced OBD2 telemetry recorder. It logs steering wheel angle, braking pressure, GPS coordinates, and lane assist data at millisecond intervals. The data from 1:10 a.m. to 1:14 a.m. confirms my steering wheel did not deviate more than 2 degrees. I never left the center of the lane. Your probable cause for the stop was fabricated. Mitchell's chest was heaving visibly now. The air in the room felt impossibly thin. Next, Evelyn continued seamlessly, pulling out a small USB drive and placing it next to the telemetry report. In your report, you stated the driver, me, was belligerent and uncooperative, requiring you to use verbal commands to maintain scene safety. However, the synchronized audio from my hidden dash cam, combined with the body cam footage we subpoenaed from your unit, tells a different story. Samuel walked over to the table, plugged the USB into a sleek tablet, and turned the screen toward Mitchell and Lawson. The video played. Mitchell saw his own imposing figure approaching the charcoal sedan in the rain. He watched himself bang his heavy flashlight against the glass. Then the audio filled the quiet room, crisp, clear, and damning. I didn't ask for a speech. You people always want to narrate everything. Are you calling me a liar in my own town, girl? I can have you sitting in a holding cell for 48 hours before anyone even knows you're missing. People who don't cooperate out here tend to have real bad luck. Evelyn paused the video, freezing Mitchell's sneering face on the screen. You turned your body microphone off, Sergeant, Evelyn noted, tapping the screen. A direct violation of Camden PD policy. But you didn't know my vehicle was recording. You threatened to abduct me, hold me without processing, and heavily implied physical harm. You did this because you believed I was a vulnerable black woman alone on a dark road, with no power to stop you. You relied on the color of your law enforcement authority to terrorize a civilian. It was just a bad night, Mitchell stammered, the words spilling out of his mouth in a desperate, pathetic rush. The tough guy facade had completely evaporated. I was stressed. It was a long shift. I didn't mean any of it. It's just cop talk, a command presence to ensure compliance. Lawson kicked Mitchell under the table, his eyes blazing with fury. Shut up, Brad. I told you to shut your mouth. Evelyn leaned back in her chair, a look of profound disgust crossing her features. Cop talk. I see. Let's talk about another one of your bad nights, Sergeant. Let's talk about Terence Gibbs. The mention of the name hit Mitchell like a physical blow. He physically recoiled in his chair. Terence Gibbs, Evelyn said, sliding a crime scene photo of the Beaton College student across the table. Pulled over for a broken tail light that wasn't actually broken. Pulled out of his car, beaten, and arrested for possession of 3 ounces of cocaine. Cocaine that miraculously appeared under his seat after you searched it without a warrant. That was a righteous bust, Mitchell forced out, his voice trembling. He was a dealer. He resisted. He was an engineering student with a 3.8 GPA, Evelyn countered, her voice rising in intensity for the first time. And he is currently sitting in my office in Trenton, preparing a sworn affidavit, because the cocaine you found in his car, Sergeant, was traced via its chemical signature back to an evidence locker seizure from a cartel bust 3 months prior. An evidence locker that your access card opened 4 hours before you pulled Terrence over. You can't prove I took it, Mitchell whispered, the sweat now dripping freely down his forehead, stinging his eyes. The camera in the evidence room was down for maintenance that day. Evelyn's smile was a terrifying thing to witness. It was the smile of an apex predator that had just snapped the neck of its prey. You're right, Evelyn agreed softly. The camera was down, which is why I didn't rely on it. I relied on Officer Paul Davis. Mitchell's head snapped up. Officer Davis, Evelyn continued, was arrested at his home at 5:30 a.m. this morning by FBI tactical agents. Facing 20 years in a federal penitentiary for his role in your extortion ring, targeting local businesses, Davis decided to be pragmatic. He signed a comprehensive proffer agreement at 6:15 a.m. He gave us everything, Bradley. He gave us the burner phones. He gave us the shakedown schedules. And he confessed to watching you take the narcotics from the evidence locker to plant in Terrence Gibbs's car. Mitchell slumped back in his chair, all the fight completely leaving his body. The invincible shield he had hidden behind for years had been shattered into 1,000,000 pieces in less than 20 minutes. He was drowning, and the woman he had tried to destroy on a dark, rainy road was the one holding his head under the water. While Bradley Mitchell was suffocating under the weight of Evelyn Brooks' evidence in Conference Room B, the world he had built outside was being systematically dismantled. Samuel Reed checked his watch. It was exactly 9 a.m. Right on time, Samuel murmured, turning away from the window and looking directly at Mitchell. Sergeant, you might want to look out this window. Mitchell didn't move. He stared blankly at the polished wood of the conference table. Lawson, however, stood up and peered through the blinds into the brick alleyway that led to the precinct's rear motor pool. Lawson gasped. 3 unmarked black tactical vans had just slammed into the alleyway, blocking all exits. A dozen men and women wearing tactical vests emblazoned with FBI and state police poured out. They didn't bother buzzing the intercom. They used a breaching ram to smash open the precinct's heavy steel rear door. "What the hell is happening?" Lawson demanded, turning back to Evelyn, genuine terror in his eyes now. "You're raiding a police station." "We are executing federally sanctioned search warrants," Evelyn corrected him, stacking her files neatly. "Right now, agents are seizing every hard drive, every evidence log, and every locker in this building. Simultaneously, a separate tactical team is executing a no-knock warrant on your primary residence in Cherry Hill, Sergeant Mitchell." Mitchell let out a pathetic whimpering sound. "My wife. My kids are at school. But my wife is home." "Your wife," Evelyn stated coldly, "is currently being interviewed by IRS criminal investigators. Which brings me to your finances. Police sergeants in Camden make a respectable living, but they do not typically afford $500,000 summer cabins in the Poconos, nor do they purchase brand-new offshore center console boats with cash." Evelyn pulled a bank ledger from her portfolio. "We traced the cash you and Officer Davis extorted from the 5th Street auto body shop. You were careful not to deposit it in traditional accounts. But you weren't careful enough about your mistress." Mitchell buried his face in his hands. "Your former informant, whom you've been having an affair with for 2 years, was more than happy to tell us about the safety deposit box at the Citizens Bank branch on Route 70 in Cherry Hill." Evelyn continued, her voice unrelenting. FBI agents drilled the box 45 minutes ago. They recovered $420,000 in bundled, sequentially marked bills, alongside ledgers detailing a protection racket you've been running for half a decade. "Chief Dunn," Lawson stammered, frantically dialing his phone. "I need to call the chief. Dunn will put a stop to this. He has political connections." "Put the phone down, Mr. Lawson," Samuel ordered, his voice suddenly sharp and commanding. He stepped away from the window, his hand resting casually near his hip. "Chief Wallace Dunn is currently unavailable," Evelyn said. She reached into the very back of her portfolio and produced a final, devastating photograph. She tossed it onto the table. It slid and stopped perfectly between Mitchell's hands. Mitchell looked down through his fingers. It was a high-resolution, time-stamped photo taken just 2 hours ago at the prestigious Pine Valley Golf Club. It showed Chief Wallace Dunn, still wearing his expensive golf cleats, being bent over the hood of an FBI sedan, his hands cuffed tightly behind his back. "Chief Dunn," Evelyn explained, "was indicted by a federal grand jury late last night on 34 counts of racketeering, wire fraud, and conspiracy to distribute narcotics. When we flipped Officer Davis, Davis handed us the chief. He's been taking a 30% cut of your extortion money for 6 years. The room was dead silent again, save for the stenographer's typing. The realization washed over Mitchell like a bucket of ice water. There was no union protection. There was no chief to cover it up. There was no political favor to call in. The entire corrupt ecosystem he had thrived in had been burned to the ground while he was sitting in this room, completely blind to the inferno. Gregory Lawson slowly put his phone back in his pocket. He looked at Mitchell, then looked at Evelyn. The blustering, confident union lawyer was gone. I am officially withdrawing as Sergeant Mitchell's counsel," Lawson said, his voice shaking. He grabbed his briefcase. "I have not been apprised of these federal charges, and my union mandate does not cover organized crime and RACO violations." "Greg, you can't leave me here," Mitchell screamed, leaping out of his chair and grabbing Lawson's sleeve. "You're my lawyer." Lawson violently yanked his arm away. "I'm a labor dispute rep, Brad. You're looking at federal pound-me-in-the-arse prison for the rest of your natural life. You are on your own." Lawson didn't look back. He practically sprinted out of the conference room, leaving the door wide open. Mitchell stood alone at the table. The swaggering predator from Route 9 was gone, replaced by a broken, terrified man. His knees gave out, and he collapsed back into his chair, tears streaming down his face, ruining the starch of his uniform collar. He looked across the table at Evelyn Brooks. She sat perfectly still, her posture immaculate, her expression devoid of any sympathy, pity, or triumph. She just looked at him with the cold, sterile gaze of an executioner who had successfully pulled the lever. "Please," Mitchell whispered, his voice cracking, snot running from his nose. He clasped his hands together on the table, a desperate posture of prayer. "Please, Miss Brooks, I'll do anything. I'll testify against Dunn. I'll wear a wire on the mare. I have kids. Please give me a deal. I'm begging you." Evelyn slowly closed her leather portfolio. The snap of the metal clasp echoed loudly in the room. She stood up, smoothing the front of her crimson suit. "When you had Terence Gibbs crying on the curb, his future ruined because you wanted to pad your arrest stats, did you give him a deal?" Evelyn asked softly. "When you threatened to make me disappear in a dark cell because you didn't like the tone of my voice, did you offer me grace?" Mitchell sobbed, unable to meet her eyes. "I don't make deals with predators, Bradley," Evelyn Brooks said, turning her back on him and walking toward the door. "I make examples of them." She stepped out into the hallway, leaving Mitchell alone with Samuel Reed. Samuel pulled a pair of heavy steel handcuffs from his belt. The metallic clinking sound filled the room. "Stand up, Sergeant," Samuel commanded, his voice devoid of emotion. "Put your hands behind your back." The heavy metallic ratchet of the Smith & Wesson handcuffs locking around Bradley Mitchell's wrists echoed off the bare walls of Conference Room B. For a man who had spent his entire adult life putting those exact restraints on other people, often with unnecessary, agonizing force, the sensation of the cold steel biting into his own skin was a profound, world-shattering shock. "Walk," Samuel Reed commanded, his grip firmly locked onto Mitchell's bicep. Mitchell stumbled as he was led out of the conference room and into the main bullpen of the Internal Affairs Division. The scene outside the door was one of absolute, orchestrated chaos. The quiet bureaucracy of the morning had been entirely violently upended. Dozens of federal agents in olive-drab tactical gear and windbreakers were systematically dismantling the precinct. Desks were being upended. Computers were being unplugged and tagged with bright red evidence tape. In the center of the room, Captain Sarah Jenkins of the State Police Anti-Corruption Task Force was loudly directing a team of forensic accountants who were currently burning up decades' worth of physical arrest logs. As Samuel marched Mitchell through the bullpen, the few clean officers who hadn't been swept up in the raid stood backed against the walls, their faces pale, watching in stunned silence. The untouchable Sergeant Mitchell, the man who had ruled the night shift with an iron fist, was doing the perp walk through his own house. Mitchell looked desperately for a sympathetic face, a fellow brother in blue who would shout in protest. He found none. The blue wall of silence hadn't just cracked today. Evelyn Brooks had detonated a bunker buster directly into its foundation. "Keep your head up, Bradley," Samuel whispered coldly into his ear as they approached the elevator. "You wanted everyone to know who was in charge. Let them see." Down on the street level, the scene was even more chaotic. The tactical vans that had breached the alleyway were now being loaded with heavily armed officers, pulling out boxes of seized contraband, illegal cash stashes found in lockers, and unauthorized weapons. Word had leaked to the press with astonishing speed. By the time Samuel pushed Mitchell through the front glass doors of the precinct, a sea of satellite trucks, flashing cameras, and shouting reporters had already cordoned off the steps. The rain from the previous night had cleared, leaving a bright, unforgiving morning sun that highlighted the stark reality of the moment. "Sergeant Mitchell, is it true you planted evidence?" "Sergeant, are you facing federal racketeering charges?" Mitchell squeezed his eyes shut, trying to turn his face away from the blinding camera flashes. But Samuel held him firm, guiding him down the concrete steps toward a waiting black SUV. Watching from the tinted windows of a mobile command center parked across the street, Evelyn Brooks sat perfectly still. She held a cup of tea, her eyes tracking Mitchell's humiliating descent. There was no joy in her expression, no vindictive smirk. She viewed the scene with the clinical detachment of a surgeon who had successfully excised a malignant tumor. "All secondary targets are in custody, Ms. Brooks," Special Agent Michael Trent announced, stepping into the back of the command center. He handed her a fresh tablet, showing a grid of mugshots. "We pulled Officer Miller out of his patrol car on Interstate 295. He surrendered without incident. Officer Davis is currently singing like a bird in an FBI safe house, detailing 3 more extortion targets we didn't even know about." "And the chief?" Evelyn asked, not taking her eyes off the street. "Chief Dunn is being processed at the federal courthouse in Trenton," Agent Trent replied, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. He tried to claim medical distress when the cuffs came out on the golf course, but the paramedics cleared him. "He's going straight into a holding cell." Evelyn nodded slowly. "Good. Freeze all their pension assets immediately under the RICO statutes. I don't want a single dime of taxpayer money funding their defense. Already in motion, Trent confirmed. You really brought the hammer down on this one, Evelyn. The local union is in absolute disarray. They issued a press release distancing themselves from Mitchell and Dunn 5 minutes ago. Evelyn finally turned away from the window, setting her tea down. They aren't distancing themselves because they suddenly found a moral compass, Michael. They are distancing themselves because they know I have the bank records. They are terrified they are next. She stood up, buttoning her crimson jacket. Prepare the press briefing room at the Capitol. The Attorney General wants to make a joint statement at noon. It's time to tell the city of Camden that the predators no longer wear the badges. 14 months later, the damp, rain-soaked night on Route 9 felt like a lifetime ago. Inside the vast, mahogany-paneled courtroom of the United States District Court for the District of New Jersey, the air was thick with finality. Judge Margaret Higgins, a formidable jurist known for her absolute intolerance of public corruption, peered over her reading glasses at the defense table. Sitting there was Bradley Mitchell. He was practically unrecognizable. The imposing, barrel-chested predator in the tailored police uniform had withered. He wore a baggy tan jumpsuit issued by the Federal Detention Center. His hair had thinned and gone completely gray. His shoulders were slumped, his posture broken by over a year of solitary confinement, a necessity to keep a former corrupt cop alive in a federal facility. He had not gone to trial. Once Evelyn Brooks had laid out the mountain of evidence, the telemetry data, the covert dashcam footage, the financial ledgers, the damning testimony from 3 of his own squad members, and the bank records from his mistress. Mitchell's high-priced defense attorneys had bluntly advised him that a trial would be a suicide mission. He had pled guilty to 2 counts of civil rights violations under color of law, 1 count of federal racketeering, and 1 count of witness tampering. Evelyn Brooks sat at the prosecution table, her demeanor as sharp and composed as ever. She watched as the bailiff called the first witness for the victim impact statements. Terence Gibbs walked through the wooden swinging doors. He was wearing a sharp, well-fitted navy suit. He walked with his head held high, though his hands trembled slightly as he took the podium facing the judge. "Mr. Gibbs," Judge Higgins said gently, "you may address the court and the defendant whenever you are ready." Terence took a deep breath. He looked directly at Mitchell, who cowardly lowered his eyes to the table. 14 months ago, Terence began, his voice steadying. "I was an engineering student. I was working 2 jobs to keep my scholarship. I believed in the system. I believed that if I did the right thing, I would be safe." He gripped the edges of the podium. "Sergeant Mitchell didn't just take away my freedom for 4 months when he planted those drugs in my car. He took away my faith in the society I was trying so hard to be a part of. He looked at me and saw nothing but a statistic he could use to boost his arrest record. He humiliated me. He beat me. And he tried to destroy my future simply because he had the badge to do it." Terence paused, glancing over at Evelyn, who offered a small, reassuring nod. "But he failed," Terence continued, his voice echoing powerfully in the quiet courtroom. "Because of the work of the special prosecutor, my record has been completely expunged. I have been re-enrolled in my university. I am taking my life back. Bradley Mitchell is not a police officer. He is a criminal who hid behind a uniform. And today I get to walk out of these doors a free man while he finally pays for what he is." A murmur of agreement rippled through the gallery, which was packed with civil rights advocates, local citizens, and a heavy contingent of the press. Judge Higgins thanked Terence and turned her piercing gaze upon the defense table. "Mr. Mitchell, do you have anything to say before this court imposes sentence?" Mitchell slowly stood up. His hands shook as he grasped the microphone. He looked out into the gallery, seeing the faces of the people he had terrorized, the community he had betrayed. Then his eyes met Evelyn Brooks across the room. He remembered the flashlight. He remembered tapping the roof of her car. He remembered telling her she would have bad luck. It was a single moment of arrogant cruelty that had triggered the avalanche that buried his entire life. I am sorry," Mitchell croaked, his voice pathetic and hollow. "I lost my way. I let the power get to me. I apologize to Mr. Gibbs, to my family, and to the city. It was a scripted, meaningless apology, devoid of genuine remorse, driven only by a desperate hope for leniency." Judge Higgins wasn't buying it. "Mr. Mitchell," the judge began, her voice ringing out like a hammer on an anvil. "You took an oath to protect the vulnerable. Instead, you preyed upon them. You operated a criminal enterprise out of a police precinct. You planted evidence. You extorted citizens, and you used the threat of state-sanctioned violence to enforce your will. You are the embodiment of everything the public fears about law enforcement." She picked up her pen. "Your actions have caused immeasurable damage to the trust between the community and the officers who actually serve with honor. For your crimes, it is the sentence of this court that you be remanded to the custody of the Federal Bureau of Prisons for a term of 240 months, 20 years, without the possibility of early parole." Mitchell's knees buckled. His lawyer had to grab his arm to keep him from collapsing to the floor. The gallery erupted in a collective gasp, followed by scattered applause that the bailiff quickly moved to silence. "Furthermore," Judge Higgins added, raising her voice over the din, "you are ordered to pay full restitution to the victims of your extortion ring, liquidating all remaining personal assets to do so. Court is adjourned." The sharp crack of the gavel signaled the absolute undeniable end of Bradley Mitchell. Two large federal marshals immediately stepped up behind Mitchell, grabbing him by his jumpsuit and hauling him away toward the holding cells. He didn't look back. He was a ghost being dragged into the dark. Evelyn Brooks stood up, calmly organizing her case files and slipping them into her leather portfolio. Samuel Reed walked over, a rare, genuine smile on his face. 20 years, Samuel said quietly. "He'll be nearly 70 by the time he sees the outside again. The chief is looking at 15. We did it, Evelyn. We broke the wheel in Camden." "We broke one wheel, Samuel," Evelyn corrected gently, snapping the clasp of her portfolio shut. "There are always others. But today the system worked the way it was supposed to. Terence Gibbs gets his life back. That's what matters." Evelyn picked up her bag and walked down the center aisle of the courtroom. As she pushed through the heavy wooden doors and stepped out into the bright, sunlit corridor of the courthouse, a swarm of reporters began calling her name. She paused for a brief moment, adjusting her glasses. She thought back to that dark, rainy night on Route 9. The terror Mitchell had tried to instill in her. The absolute certainty he had in his own untouchable power. He had picked the wrong car. He had threatened the wrong woman. Evelyn stepped forward into the flashing lights of the cameras, ready to go to work. The hunt for justice was never truly over, but tonight she would finally get a good night's sleep. If you were captivated by this intense, true-to-life story of corruption, power, and the relentless pursuit of justice, make sure to engage with our channel. Cases like Evelyn Brooks's fight against a broken system happen more often than we realize, and shining a light on these dramatic legal battles helps bring awareness to the truth. Do you think a 20-year sentence was enough for Sergeant Mitchell? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments below. Don't forget to hit that like button, share this thrilling story with your friends, and subscribe for more gripping real-life drama.